Thank you very much. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, come on over and take a seat. My name's Mark Strauss. I'm the Libertarian candidate for U.S. Congress in the 2nd District of Iowa. You know what? The past 13 years I've been making videos. I was actually featured on the presidential debates for the Democratic Party back in 2007. Then I was flown to the Republican debates in St. Petersburg that year and featured on the Republican debates. Both of those parties tried to get me to come with them, at which time I asked them, don't you watch my videos? Because my call tag has always been, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, I'm an American, just like you. The two-party system has been strangling America. But you know what? I went libertarian because enough of you voted for Gary Johnson back in the 2007 or 2016 elections that we gained major party status in Iowa, and that's what gets us here, or gets me here on stage. Now, by the way, can you imagine a Congress and a Senate with more than two parties where a party boss does not tell the party in power to toe the line or they're going to primary him, where multiple parties have to come together and do what's best for America and not what for the party? Next, I'd like to talk about term limits. I am a firm believer in term limits, 2 terms, and not just a 2-year term, but let's give every senator and every congressman, the same as the president, 2 4-year terms. You come in, you do your job, you get out. What looks so horrible on anybody's resume of U.S. congressman or senator that they got to go spend the rest of their life there? The other thing we have to do is make sure that we not allow any of them to then take a job as a lobbyist and go back in and lobby the government. This has corrupted our system to the core. There's one way to fix it, and let's get multiple parties in there. So yes, I am a libertarian, but I'm an American first, and I'm going to do what the constituents want, not what my party boss wants. I'd also like to talk about taxes. You know, the IRS, it's crazy. They monitor hundreds of millions of Americans on every dime they make. And then on half of them that itemize, they monitor every dime they spend. And try being a small business owner in America. I sold my company January 1st as part of this process for running. And I got to tell you that my worst nightmare was the IRS, not just the state IRS or the federal IRS, but all the paperwork that went along with it. What I propose is we go to one tax, one simple tax. You buy something, you pay a tax. And by the way, cost of goods would go down, not up. All of those taxes are already embedded in there. But let's take the burden off the employer. It's not their job to collect the government's taxes. Next, I tell you what, I'd like to talk about health care, because that's another thing that they put onto the burden of the employer. Why is the employer supplying health care? You know, Obama came up with the ACA. The Affordable Care Act. It wasn't very affordable, was it? I know my insurance went from $133 a month in 2008 with a $2,500 deductible to, in February, it was $444 a month with a $7,500 deductible. Guess what? When the individual mandate went away, I stopped paying the extortion. We need to have a free market solution. I want to see Geico and Progressive and the General selling insurance. You ought to be able to buy across party lines. But what Obama did is he brought the healthcare industry in. He brought the insurance industry in. He brought Big Pharma in, and he said, guys, I'm going to give you 30 million more customers, and don't worry about what you charge them because the government's going to pick up the tab. Let's have a free market approach. Now, while I am libertarian and I do believe in the free market approach, I want income equality in America. Now, you know what? If you own your company and that's your money, your blood, sweat, and tears in that company, pay people whatever you want. But the minute you go to the public trough, I believe that publicly traded companies should have a mandatory 20-to-1 maximum to average ratio from the CEO to the average employee. It's currently at about 475-to-1, and I tell you, most of those CEOs, they didn't design anything, they didn't make anything, or they made their big money off the IPO and maintained 51%. Let's put an end to that. You know, because I tell you what, another thing that's coming down the pike, and everybody needs to be concerned with, is AI and robotics. not too long ago, I sent a big order into Siemens. They invited me to their factory to see it being made. I showed up, I'm walking along, and they come to an area, and here's a guy standing at a PC, and there were robot arms and things moving vertically and horizontally, and they said, "This is Joe. Joe's been on this line for 20 years. There were 15 people on this line when Joe started. Now it's just Joe." Ladies and gentlemen, AI and robotics are going to take jobs faster than we've ever seen before in the past, and we need to make sure that we find a way to keep everybody relevant in this job market. And by the way, when you talk about that, you have to talk about immigration. Now, first of all, you know what? When it comes to DACA, those kids don't know any other place. They don't know any other country. Make them U.S. citizens. Give them a path to citizenship. Now, but when it comes to the other, there's a whole bunch of other people that have gotten in here that we allowed to get in across that border. You know what? We're not going to round them up and shove them all back across. We need to find a place to put them as well. But at the same time, we need to secure our borders. We can't be going through this every 20 years. You know, we're facing a lot of problems, not only here in America, but around the world. Fresh water is going to become a huge issue, and you're going to see migrant flows all over the world. You're already seeing it coming out of Northern Africa into Western Europe, coming out of the Arab nations into Eastern Europe, and of course on our southern shores. Another problem that we've got here in the U.S., of course, you see out in California. I was just out in Redding 2 weeks ago when the big fire was going on. We need to properly manage our forests and our water. It wouldn't be so dry if we were doing that. And another thing, though, by the way, when you start talking about fresh water, there's a thing called fracking. You know, we waste billions of gallons of fresh water every year, mixing it with horrible chemicals, pumping it deep into the Earth's crust, never to come back as usable water. Sorry about that. So, and speaking of fracking, let's talk about energy. I'm glad I live in Iowa. Last year, Mid-American Energy in Iowa produced 83% of its power, of your power, with renewable sources, and that's wind turbines and solar. In my business, I actually sold them some of that solar. I actually sold urban scale wind to people as well. It works, but at the same time, it doesn't mean I want to subsidize that industry. I want industries to stand on its own. I don't want to subsidize the gas and oil industry. I think they've made enough money, but that doesn't mean we need to subsidize other industries. Believe me, they'll take over as time goes by, as they become more and more profitable. You know, with all of these issues we're facing around the world, our military is very important. And I believe we need to have the strongest military in the world, and we can. But guess what? It's not about who has the most guys anymore, or even who has the most tanks. It's all about technology. And those with the most technologically advanced military are gonna be the ones that are gonna be able to protect their countries the best. But we currently have over 800 bases around the world. That's insanity. Okay, let's cut that back to about 200. Make sure that they're large enough to honor our treaties with the countries around the world, but stop spending money like it's going out of style. And also, I want to talk about the war on drugs. You know what? I mean, states all over the United States are legalizing marijuana and making a tax base off it. Let's face it, alcohol is far worse than marijuana. And opioids are certainly far worse than marijuana. You're seeing states where opioid use is going down, where they've legalized medical marijuana, and alcohol use goes down where they legalize recreational marijuana. Let's get things straight. Now, believe me, I'm not one of these libertarians that want to legalize heroin. No. But do I want to jail every user? Absolutely not. Let's give them some rehab. Let's help them overcome an affliction, because in most cases, if they're small level dealers, they're probably dealing to support their own darn habit. Ladies and gentlemen, these are just a few of the issues that I came out here to talk about today. You know, I got started back in 2007 when Mitt Romney knocked on my door. Actually, it was 2006. He looked me dead in the eye, and I said, you know what? Why are we in Iraq? He looked me in the eye and he said, well, they attacked us. Don't you remember the Twin Towers? A few minutes later, I threw him off my property. What an idiot. And it was shortly after that, then in 2007, when I was featured on the debates. You know, when it comes to health care, we've got an aging population. The video I made that was featured on the Democratic presidential debates was about Alzheimer's. In 2003, my mother came to live with me, and she was battling Alzheimer's. I went through every stage of that. She died 4 years later in my home, and it was the best experience of my life taking care of her. I currently am very big about family. My older brother lives with me. He's physically and mentally challenged, and he'll be with me for the rest of his life. But what I asked the Democratic Party was, actually the video was me standing behind my handicapped brother who was spoon feeding my Alzheimer's stricken mother. And I said, here's my mother with Alzheimer's. My brother and I are baby boomers. What are you going to do about us? It was partially that when everybody started hollering on stage about stem cell research, and then later President Obama did sign it into law. So these are just some of my issues, ladies and gentlemen. And believe me, if you'll go to StraussForHouse.com, I've got videos on every single issue, anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute long. I'm here with solutions. Last year, when Hurricane Harvey was down in Houston, I packed up my truck and my boat, and I went down and I spent 5 days on the ground rescuing people. My truck actually led 13 out of 14 missions, leading in not only police and fire from around the country, but National Guard. And my experience while I was there was the fact that, guess what? The National Guard didn't want to be there. The police and fire guys that were there, now these were trained professionals, and they were there doing their job. So the minute I came back, I sent out a press release to all of the news agencies, and I said, we need to create a flood and hurricane response base in northern Alabama. And this would allow us to get to anything in the Tennessee Valley, the Ohio Valley, or Mississippi valleys prone to floods, or the South Coast or the East Coast for hurricanes inside 12 hours, rather than depending on citizen rescuers. I hated to hear President Trump actually patting Governor Abbott on the back because not as many people died in Houston as did in New Orleans. Well, guess what? If it wouldn't have been for the hundreds of guys like me that put their lives and assets at risk and went down there and spent days on the ground, I was rescuing till 4 o'clock in the morning, sleeping in the back of my truck till 7 and up again and doing it all over again, like a lot of other guys that did that. But if we would have a preparedness base in northern Alabama, and like I said, don't stock it with the Guard. Let's have a contest of police and fire professionals from all over the country, so that when we choose those guys, all they do is throw a backpack on their back, hop on a plane, go to that base, all the equipment's ready, and they're not putting their local assets at risk. They're not putting anything but their lives at risk, but there'll be something that they volunteered and that they're good for. Do I have any questions out there? Well, I got to tell you something. When it comes to farming, and I'm wanting to interview some farmers to talk about, because I'd like to know, how do farmers enjoy the federal government telling them what to grow, paying them to grow this or paying them not to grow that? Wouldn't it be better for you to be able to handle your own crops?
What about Puerto Rico that's been left behind since Hurricane Harvey? What about Puerto Rico? How it's been left behind since Harvey?
I got to tell you something. Puerto Rico went through a horrible experience with the hurricane. I think it was Hurricane Maria. I've always wondered why Puerto Rico has never gone to statehood. Number one, that would have solved everything. And I've seen them multiple times vote it down. They need to be a state. I don't really know where exactly that disaster was mishandled, other than the fact that they didn't get everything they needed. But at the same time, I think them coming on as a state would solve that. If they really want to be the 51st state, let's see them become the 51st state, and then they have everything that America has to offer.
One more question. You spoke about people with addictions and the people that are striving in the prison systems for being addicted. What is it? How do you plan on making things better?
Well, first of all, I can't stand the idea of prisons for profit. That gives judges reasons, and judges have gone to jail before because they were loading up, juvenile detention centers and other prisons. I want to put an end to prison for profit. Here, could you? I want to put an end sorry about that. I want to put an end to prisons for profit. And just like I said, I would rather see rehab for these people. You know what? Prison should be for violent offenders, not low-level drug offenders. Let's put an end to all that. It's just absolutely ridiculous. The war on drugs was nothing more than a profit scam for companies. And you know what? I got to tell you something. When you go to these other states that have legalized marijuana, they're taking advantage of the tax base. And it's not just the tax base, but the fewer people that they have to put in jail.
Right.
So there are great benefits to this, and nobody's ever OD'd on pot.
Thank you.
It doesn't happen. Any other questions? Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, my name's Mark Strauss. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I'm an American, just like you. Thank you very much.